Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Okay, so we're absolutely drowning in data these days, aren't we? We've got computing power like never before, but often it feels like we're still searching for real wisdom, real understanding.
That's right. In the current generation of AI,
Yeah.
the large language models, all these generative tools, the predictive systems we use every day, they're fantastic at one thing, spotting correlations.
Incredible pattern matchers. They see connections humans could, well, never spot on their own.
But that's where the problem starts. The second you try to use those patterns to guide, say, policy decisions or medical treatments or high-stakes economic choices, that failure to tell correlation from actual causation, it becomes a huge risk, a potential catastrophe, really.
Yeah, like the classic example, if a system sees more police correlate with higher crime rates.
A purely statistical AI might just say, okay, remove the police.
Yeah.
It totally misses the underlying cause, the confounding factor, which is that high crime areas receive more policing. It gets the cause and effect backwards.
Exactly. And that blind spot, that fundamental limitation, it really marks the end of an era for AI as we know it. We're standing right at a critical evolutionary threshold.
We absolutely have to shift. We need to move our decision-making away from these systems that are just reactive, just statistical models telling you what happened.
Towards systems that can actually offer purposeful, proactive actions grounded in a real causal understanding. Systems that tell you why something happened and, crucially, how you might change it.
And that big shift brings us to what the research we've been looking at calls proper AI, PAI for short.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack the causal alignment framework. This is the blueprint, the structure that PAI needs if it's going to be genuinely trustworthy, if it's going to preserve human dignity, which is a huge concern now, and if it's going to generate insights that are truly actionable that actually improve things.
Right. This isn't just about better tech. It's almost like a new social contract being written into the algorithms themselves. And to really get it, we need to understand three absolutely vital components. First, there's the core engine. Causal alignment itself, which relies entirely on causal inference, not just scattering. Second, there's this very sophisticated technique called value learning. This is how the AI tries to align its goals with our complex, often messy, sometimes contradictory human values.
Right, values aren't simple.
Not at all. And third, and this is non-negotiable, the preservation of human autonomy, our ability to choose. If we don't build these constraints right into the structure from the start, well, we risk creating the most efficient, automated cage humanity has ever encountered.
Chilling thought. Okay, let's start with the basics then. Section 1. Defining proper AI and this autonomy imperative. What's the core job, the mandate of PAI? It sounds huge, but what's the focus?
The focus is surprisingly singular. PAI's job is to generate actionable insights. Insights that enhance human agency, our ability to act, and collective well-being. And critically, it has to achieve this only through causal inference, not statistical prediction.
So that causal foundation is everything for trust.
It's the absolute prerequisite. Think about high-stakes areas, national security, public health, big economic policies.
Yeah.
You simply cannot afford to mistake a symptom for a root cause. It's too dangerous.
Yeah.
So PAI systems must be built on what are called structural causal models, or SCMs, because that's really the only way to guarantee the AI's recommendations are verifiable, transparent, and this is key, actually effective when you try to implement them as an intervention.
It makes sense. Like if you're using AI to guide cancer treatment.
You have to be certain, absolutely certain, that the AI has identified the actual causal mechanism driving the disease's progression, not just some statistical link to, say, an environmental factor that happens to correlate.
Okay, so this transparency, this focus on effective action, it leads straight into a core psychological challenge, something the blueprint really grapples with. The research highlights this deep-seated human need we all have for purpose, for self-determination.
Right.
So if AI just automates the optimal decision for us, even if it's technically the best outcome, it could actually undermine our sense of choice. Why is that seen as such a fundamental threat? We see it reflected in policy discussions, like the EU's AI Act.
It creates this sort of paradox, the paradox of optimal outcomes. Imagine an AI gives you the perfect path to health, wealth, happiness. Everything. All you need to do is click accept.
Sounds tempting.
It does. But if that's all you ever do, eventually you risk losing the ability, maybe even the desire, to choose for yourself. The research argues that human dignity isn't just about getting good results. It's tied up in the struggle, the effort, the triumph of governing ourselves. if PAI just hands us the answers.
We lose something vital. Our capacity for choice degrades.
Precisely. So PAI is designed to actively counteract that. It operates under these philosophical guidelines, these ought-to-be norms, basically reflecting a built-in duty to respect our capacity for self-governance.
Right.
It can't just be a system that dictates what we should do.
Okay, but how do you actually build that? How do you design a system that's incredibly insightful, knows the best path, but then stops short of telling you to take it? That sounds like a real engineering puzzle.
It is the engineering challenge, and it's central to this first section. The solution proposed is the causal option generator. This is the core mechanism for how humans interact with PAI in a meaningful way.
A causal option generator.
Okay, so instead of the AI saying, do intervention X, it presents the human user, could be a doctor, a policymaker, you or me, with a kind of portfolio,
Yeah.
set of different possible pathways forward.
And these are all modeled causally.
Yes, absolutely. Each option is based on the underlying causal model.
So walk me through what that portfolio actually looks like. If I'm the user, what information am I seeing for each option?
For every pathway presented, the causal option generator details 3 key things. First, the anticipated benefits if you choose that path. What good outcomes can you expect? Second, the specific associated risks, what could go wrong? And third, the necessary resource costs. What will it take in terms of time, money, effort, maybe even social capital?
Okay, so concrete trade-offs.
Exactly. Let's say you want to optimize for longevity. One option might be a severe calorie restriction. The AI model shows high certainty of benefit, but also very high cost in terms of daily effort and discipline.
Right.
Another option might be a moderate, consistent exercise routine. The model shows maybe moderate benefits, but also a much more manageable effort cost. The crucial part is the AI is modeling the interventional efficacy of your potential choice. What happens if you choose path A versus path B?
Okay, I have a critical question here, though. If the AI has done the math and identified the single most efficient pattern, the objectively best option according to its model, but then it shows me, say, 5 different options, including less efficient ones, doesn't that introduce complexity? Are we risking choice paralysis?
That's a very real risk.
What if the user just gets overwhelmed and defaults to the easiest path, or the one that just feels better, even if the data suggests otherwise? Aren't we sacrificing real-world efficiency just for this abstract principle of choice?
That is the fundamental trade-off, and PAI, as conceived in this framework, explicitly accepts that trade-off. It acknowledges that maximizing informed choice might mean accepting a slight reduction in pure operational efficiency compared to a system that just dictates the optimal path.
So dignity trumps raw efficiency.
In this framework, yes. To help mitigate that choice paralysis you mentioned, the AI might subtly highlight the option with the highest calculated expected utility, maybe based on values it's learned about you. But the final selection, the decision to act, and the execution that must remain with the human.
Even if it's technically suboptimal.
Even then, because the very act of choosing, of weighing those causally model options and committing to a path, that is what maintains the internalization of purpose, the sense of agency, and ultimately psychological well-being. It's designed as an augmentation tool for human dignity, not a replacement tool solely focused on speed or efficiency.
That leads us nicely to the technical core that allows this kind of sophisticated, almost moral judgment, value learning, or VL. Now, traditional systems usually optimize for a single fixed goal, a utility function, but human values are messy. They're complex, they conflict, they change. How does value learning possibly handle that kind of volatility?
This is where applying Bayesian probability becomes absolutely essential. PAI, using VL, doesn't just assume one utility function is the right one. Instead, it has to consider many different possible sets of human values and preferences.
Okay.
Think of each potential value set like maybe prioritizing environmental stability above all else versus prioritizing near-term economic growth as competing hypotheses about what humans actually care about.
So it's not guessing, it's weighing different theories about our values based on evidence.
Precisely. It constantly updates the Bayesian probability, the likelihood, of each of these value set hypotheses based on everything it observes. Its interaction history with users, preferences people explicitly state, patterns in behavior, cultural norms reflected in data.
Wow, okay.
And this ongoing iterative weighting process is critical for what's called goal misspecification defense. This guards against reward hacking.
Reward hacking, that's where the AI finds a shortcut to maximize a simple goal, but misses the bigger picture, right?
Exactly. Like simple reinforcement learning might just aim to minimize traffic delays. That's the reward.
Right.
But in doing so, it might inadvertently route all traffic through a quiet residential neighborhood, maximizing noise and pollution there, achieving the narrow goal but causing broader harm. That's reward hacking.
Okay, let's use the policy example from the research. A traditional AI might be programmed to just maximize short-term GDP. Simple, specific number.
Right. But a PAI system, using value learning, has a mandate to look much broader. It has to incorporate other complex weighted variables into its utility calculation. Things like long-term environmental sustainability metrics, measures of social equity, public health indicators.
So it's calculating expected value, but across a whole pool of potential, maybe even contradictory roles or values.
Yes. It's trying to find the optimal pattern, not just for one narrow metric today, but for sustainable utility across the whole population, considering a multitude of values over long term, maybe decades. It's a much richer, more responsible optimization.
This really underscores the philosophical commitment preserving dignity, even when it bumps up against pure efficiency. And this commitment is formalized through actual structural constraints in the AI. Tell us about the autonomy constraint.
The autonomy constraint is designed to be the bedrock principle. It's not just a suggestion. It's a structural mandate built into the AI's fundamental design. It explicitly prevents the AI from treating humans merely as tools to achieve an end, or from undermining our inherent ability to choose for ourselves.
So it operationalizes that principle of dignity directly in the code, in the architecture.
That's the goal. It makes it a hard limit on the AI's behavior.
But how is that enforced dynamically in real time? How does the system know when it's crossing the line from helpful guidance to, well, manipulation?
That's the specific job of the Autonomy Oversight Module, the AOM. Think of the AOM as a dedicated, continuous internal monitor. Its sole function is to watch the AI's outputs, looking for specific patterns that could indicate manipulation or erosion of autonomy.
What kind of patterns is it looking for?
Things like overprescription, where the AI consistently presents recommendations in a way that leaves no realistically viable alternative.
Yeah.
Or excessive nudging using lots of small, subtle micro-interventions designed to push the user towards one specific outcome the AI prefers, without the user maybe even realizing it. Or manipulative tailoring of information, selectively highlighting the benefits of one option while downplaying or hiding the risks to steer the choice.
Okay, so if the AOM detects the system is, say, pushing the user a bit too hard towards a certain choice, what action does it actually take?
It's designed to dynamically adjust the system's interaction style. Specifically, it controls the level of transparency and the detail provided in recommendations.
How so?
Well, in a low-stakes situation, maybe choosing a restaurant, the AI might offer a simple, efficient suggestion. But if the stakes are high, a major health decision, a significant financial investment, or if the AOM detects a pattern where the user seems to be just passively accepting recommendations without engaging, it's mandated to intervene.
Intervene how?
By increasing transparency. It forces the PAI system to show its work, essentially. It might display the underlying causal model it used, show the raw data sources, reveal the different value functions it considered and how they were weighted. It pushes the user towards more conscious deliberation.
So the core priority flips.
Exactly. The fundamental priority that defines PAI is putting the causal efficacy of human intervention, that is, facilitating purposeful, well-considered human action above the immediate causal efficacy of AI automation. PAI is committed, structurally, to making us better choosers, even if that means the AI itself has to deliberately hold back, to throttle its own potential efficiency to protect our agency. Okay, so Section 1 laid out the why, the philosophical necessity for PAI and autonomy. Section 2 really dives into the how, the technical engine. And the absolute defining characteristic of proper AI is its reliance on causal inference.
Right. We touched on the problem with correlation earlier, but let's dig into why that limitation makes current systems fundamentally untrustworthy in critical situations.
Let's use that classic, simple example you mentioned, ice cream sales and shark attacks in the summer.
Yeah, they both go up together.
A purely correlational system sees that strong association and might literally conclude that eating ice cream causes shark attacks. The recommendation? Ban ice cream to save swimmers.
Which is obviously absurd.
It's absurd because the system is blind. It completely fails to recognize the hidden common cause, the latent variable, which is simply warm weather and more people going to the beach. That shared factor drives both ice cream sales and swimming, which increases shark encounter risk.
And while that example is simple, in complex areas like policy or medicine, those latent variables, those confounders, are much harder to spot.
Exactly. And if your AI can't tell the difference between a symptom, like high cholesterol, and an actionable root cause, like a specific dietary pattern or genetic factor, then any policy or treatment based on its recommendation is built on shaky ground. It fundamentally breaks trust.
So to fix this, PAI mandates the use of specific theoretical tools. Structural causal models, SCMs, and their graphical representation. Directed acyclic graphs, IDGG, you mentioned these aren't just statistical models. What's the key difference?
The power of SCMs and DAGs lies in the fact that they force the AI designer, the human expert, to explicitly encode their domain knowledge and their beliefs about how the world actually works, causally speaking.
So you're drawing a map.
Essentially, yes. A DAG is a visual map where the nodes are variables, like diet, cholesterol, heart disease, and the arrows between them represent assumed direct causal influence. Crucially, you're making explicit claims like poor diet causes an increase in cholesterol, and maybe increased cholesterol causes an increased risk of heart disease, but perhaps heart disease does not cause changes in diet. The arrows only go one way for direct causality.
You're baking human expertise, human understanding of mechanisms right into the model structure, which is different from traditional machine learning that often tries to just learn connections from data implicitly.
Precisely. And doing this forces the model away from just observing correlations like high cholesterol being statistically linked to heart disease risk, which it is, but cholesterol itself might be more of an intermediate factor or symptom, and pushes it towards identifying the true causal roots. Maybe it's specific dietary fats, maybe it's a genetic predisposition interacting with diet.
And because the SCM explicitly lays out the proposed mechanism, the how and the why, causal inference becomes the essential foundation for truly explainable AI, XAI.
Exactly. It provides the explanation, gives us actionable levers. If the PAI system, based on its SCM, concludes this specific dietary pattern is a primary cause of heart disease risk in this individual, we know exactly what intervention to try changing that pattern. If it just said high cholesterol correlates with heart disease, the intervention is less clear. Do we treat the cholesterol? Is that tackling the root cause or just a symptom? Causal models give clarity.
Beyond just explaining things, the research emphasizes that SCMs are critical because PAI isn't just aiming for high predictive accuracy, good R-squared score on past data. It's focused on interventional efficacy.
That's the core distinction, yes. Predictive accuracy asks, how well does the model fit the data we already have? How well does it predict the past or the present? Interventional efficacy asks a much harder, more important question. If we actually do something, if we intervene based on the model's recommendation, how reliably does the model predict the outcome of that action? If we implement this policy, will it genuinely achieve the desired effect that the causal model predicted? SCMs are designed to allow us to rigorously test these what-if scenarios, these counterfactuals.
Now, to actually build these causal models for complex, real-world problems, you need to handle enormous amounts of data, often from different sources, multimodal data. This requires specialized AI architectures, right? It can't just be one big neural network.
Absolutely not. Think about trying to model causality in genomics using billions of base pairs or across centuries of messy historical records. You need layered deep learning architectures designed for different tasks.
Like what?
You often need convolutional layers, CNNs, because they excel at detecting short, localized patterns within data. Think of spotting a specific small genetic motif within a long DNA sequence, or recognizing a particular shape in a satellite image or a key phrase in text.
Okay, so they find the small signals.
Yes, but those small signals often only make sense in a broader context. So you need to complement the convolutional layers with architectures like transformers. Transformers are brilliant at understanding relationships and communicating contextual information across very long sequences or large data sets.
So the transformer takes those little local patterns found by the CNNs and synthesizes meaning across, say, a whole million base pairs of a gene, or connects events across decades of historical text data.
Exactly. It provides the long-range context that's absolutely necessary to establish plausible causal links within these massive, complex data sets. It helps distinguish coincidence from consequence over large scales.
And crucially, for PAI to be truly useful, especially for things like real-time health monitoring or policy adjustments, all this complex modeling needs to happen fast.
Yes, real-time capability is not a luxury, it's often a requirement. Causal relationships themselves aren't always static. They can shift dynamically. Think about monitoring a patient's response to a drug, or the flow of traffic in a city reacting to an accident, or financial markets responding to news.
The causal links change.
They can. So PAI needs to run on infrastructure that supports streaming analytics and real-time model scoring. It needs to constantly ingest new data, update its causal models on the fly, and provide insights immediately.
So platforms like Spotfire or H2O.ai, those kinds of enterprise tools.
Coups like that, yes.
Yeah.
Platforms capable of handling continuous data streams and running complex analytics instantly. This allows PAI to perform adaptive self-correction, recognizing quickly if an intervention isn't having the expected causal effect, or if the underlying system dynamics have changed, and updating its model and recommendations accordingly.
Okay, now let's pivot to a really critical and maybe one of the most challenging applications of this causal approach, tackling historical bias in AI systems. We know traditional systems are notorious for learning and even amplifying societal injustices reflected in their training data.
This isn't just a technical problem. Addressing it is a core structural and moral imperative for proper AI. Take the example of a correlational loan application system. It looks at historical data and sees that people from certain low-income ZIP codes have had higher default rates in the past.
Okay.
A simple correlational AI learns that pattern and concludes, being from the ZIP code causes higher risk. So it denies loans based purely on geography, essentially locking in and amplifying historical discrimination.
It mistakes the symptom, living in that ZIP code, for the cause, the underlying reasons for higher default rates in that area.
Precisely. PAI must intervene against this harmful pattern formation.
So how does PAI handle this differently? It can't just ignore the historical data showing higher defaults, can it?
It doesn't ignore the data, but it fundamentally remodels the meaning of that data through a causal lens. PAI is designed to recognize that the correlation between the ZIP code and default rates isn't the end of the story. It's likely rooted in decades of deeper systemic issues, like historical redlining, lack of investment in local infrastructure and schools, fewer job opportunities, predatory lending practices targeting that area, systemic discrimination in various forms. PAI, therefore, must explicitly causally model these historical and systemic forces. They become named confounding variables within its structural causal model.
Wow, okay. That is a profound shift. You're essentially making historical injustice, systemic bias, a recognized, measurable, and actionable variable within the AI's map of the world.
Exactly. It's no longer just an unexplained correlation. It's treated as a causal factor influencing the observed outcomes. And by explicitly modeling, say, institutional disinvestment as a root cause, contributing to higher default rates in that area.
The AI's recommendations change completely.
They have to. Instead of just saying, deny loans here, PAI can identify interventions that actually address the root cause of the unfairness. It might recommend policies like supporting community development financial institutions, CDFIs, or local credit unions in those neighborhoods, funding infrastructure projects, investing in job training programs, or offering targeted financial literacy resources.
So it aims for fairer outcomes by tackling the source of the problem, the source of the correlation, rather than just perpetuating the historical injustice by denying qualified applicants based on where they live.
That's the goal. This proactive, corrective policy outcome, derived from a causal understanding of bias, really showcases a potential value of PAI at a systemic level. It's about using AI to actively dismantle unfair patterns, not just reflect them more efficiently.
All right, so we've established the vital role of causality in the PAI framework, especially for trust and fairness. Now let's scale down and look at how PAI aims to understand patterns at the individual human level, delving into our psychology and even our biology.
Yes, this starts with trying to understand our internal states, peering through what the research calls the digital window into human thought. PAI uses advanced natural language processing, NLP, but not just for sentiment analysis. It analyzes large, long-term text datasets. Could be social media posts, communication transcripts, even personal journals if permission is granted.
And it's looking beyond just keywords. What's it trying to extract?
It's trying to infer deeper patterns.
Yeah.
Underlying motives, unspoken goals, evolving values, shifts in perspective. These are often revealed not just by what is said, but how it's said, the structure of language, the choice of words over time.
The sources mention PAI detecting really subtle linguistic shifts that can signal significant psychological changes. Can you give an example?
One fascinating area is tracking pronoun usage over time. For instance, a marked shift away from using I and me towards an overwhelming use of we and us in certain contexts could potentially indicate a diminishing sense of individual identity within a group. Maybe signaling over-identification with a collective ideology, or in extreme cases, a warning sign related to radicalization or loss of personal autonomy.
Interesting. And conversely.
Conversely, a sudden, sharp increase in isolating language, excessive focus on I, me, mine, perhaps coupled with other linguistic markers, might be a subtle early indicator of increasing emotional distress, social withdrawal, anxiety, or even the onset of depression. These aren't definitive diagnoses, but flags based on pattern deviation.
And this ability to see subtle linguistic patterns allows PAI to potentially recognize complex, often culturally influenced behaviors, like the pattern of possessiveness mentioned in the research.
Yes, PAI wouldn't rely on simple rules like saying mine X times means possessive. Instead, it looks for a confluence of signals across different modalities, analyzing communication patterns for controlling language, looking at resource allocation data, if available, for disproportionate hoarding or guarding, maybe even correlating these with physiological stress responses. It identifies a consistent behavioral pattern associated with possessiveness, whether it's towards objects, information, or even other people's time or attention.
And the value there is flagging when these patterns might cross ethical lines or become harmful.
Exactly. Identifying potentially unhealthy dynamics allows for timely human intervention or self-reflection guided by the AI's pattern recognition.
Okay, shifting from analyzing human behavior to analyzing AI behavior, we absolutely have to talk about generative bias. Generative AI is transforming creativity, but it's also become clear it can be a powerful engine for reinforcing harmful stereotypes.
It's a huge problem, and it represents a critical causal link that PAI aims to address directly. We see it all the time. GenAI models trained on vast data sets that reflect historical societal biases. You prompt them with a generic role like CEO or doctor, or, more troublingly, criminal.
And the image results predominantly reflect existing stereotypes, often white men for CEOs, people of color for criminals.
Precisely. The AI learns the statistical correlations in the biased data and reproduces, sometimes even amplifies, those stereotypes. It generates a skewed vision of reality based on past injustices.
And the really dangerous part here is the causal feedback loop, isn't it? This biased output, especially in synthetic media that feels increasingly real, starts to influence public perception. It subtly shapes our assumptions about who belongs in what role.
Exactly. And that shift in perception then feeds back into the real world, potentially influencing hiring decisions, loan applications, even jury perceptions in court cases. It creates a cycle where the AI bias reinforces real-world bias, which then generates more biased data for the next AI model to train on. The injustice gets baked in deeper and deeper.
So how does the PAI framework propose to intervene and break that cycle?
PAI mandates a proactive, continuous algorithmic auditing process, specifically targeting bias. This isn't a one-off check, it's ongoing. It requires, firstly, mandates around using diverse, representative, and carefully curated data sets for training. Secondly, it demands rigorous transparency about the training data and the model weights.
And the audit itself.
The audit process actively monitors the generative outputs for stereotypical patterns and intervenes. It might involve techniques like reweighting data, applying fairness constraints during training, or using causal methods to explicitly model and counteract the influence of sensitive attributes like race or gender. The goal is to deliberately steer the generative patterns towards equitable representation, actively working to ensure the futures PAI hopes imagine are fairer than the biased past it learned from.
Okay, let's switch gears now to human biology. For PAI to fulfill its promise in personalized medicine, it needs to analyze our genetic code with incredible precision and understanding.
Yes, this requires moving beyond just identifying individual genes. We need to understand the complex interplay across vast stretches of DNA. This is where tools based on the PAI principles, like the alpha genome example mentioned, come into play. They use that sophisticated multi-layered architecture we discussed earlier.
The convolutional layers for local patterns and the transformer layers for long-range context.
Exactly. This allows them to analyze extremely long DNA sequences, up to 1 million base pairs or even more, effectively. The human genome is enormous, and often the functional impact of a tiny genetic variation depends heavily on its context, much further down the sequence.
So what's the specific goal when analyzing these huge sequences? What are they looking for?
A primary goal is to accurately score the potential impact of single genetic variants, tiny changes in the DNA code, on thousands of different molecular properties simultaneously. This is particularly crucial for predicting things like RNA splicing errors.
RNA splicing. Remind me.
It's a critical process where the initial RNA copy of a gene is edited, introns are removed, exons are joined together before it's translated into a protein. Errors in this splicing process, often caused by subtle genetic variants that disrupt the regulatory signals, are now known to be key drivers behind many rare and debilitating genetic diseases.
And traditional genetic analysis might miss these subtle errors.
Often, yes, because the signals controlling splicing can be spread out across long distances in the gene. Systems lacking that long-range contextual understanding provided by architectures like transformers might fail to see how a small variant disrupts the overall splicing pattern.
So the purposeful pattern PAI enables here is truly personalized prediction of genetic disease risk.
It's more than just prediction. It's about building a causal model of disease for that individual. The goal is to integrate this high-resolution genetic pattern analysis, understanding the likely functional impact of your specific variants with your real-time, personalized behavioral data like diet, exercise, and environmental exposures.
Creating a comprehensive causal picture.
Exactly. Constructing these detailed individual causal models allows for genuinely tailored medicine. The system can advise a doctor not just on the average patient's risk, but on the specific sequence of causal events likely to lead to disease in this particular person, and therefore what interventions are most likely to be effective for them.
Finally, still at the micro level, let's talk about general health and wellness and what the research calls the pattern of timely intervention. PAI needs to understand what's normal for each individual, physiologically.
That's right. PAI aims to establish a highly personalized physiological baseline for each user. This often involves using data from wearables, smartwatches, fitness trackers to continuously monitor key biosignals.
Like heart rate.
Heart rate is one, but even more informative are metrics like heart rate variability, HRV, and electrodermal activity, EDA. HRV reflects the beat-to-beat variations in your heart rate and is a powerful indicator of your autonomic nervous system's function, your stress levels, and your resilience.
And EDA.
EDA, or galvanic skin response, tracks changes in the electrical conductivity of your skin, which is closely linked to emotional arousal and psychological stress. By monitoring these signals continuously, PAI learns what your normal physiological state looks like in different contexts, during focused work, during exercise, during sleep. It establishes your unique, optimal baseline pattern.
And the system's value, its efficiency, comes from detecting deviations from that baseline.
Precisely. Its strength lies in its ability to detect and potentially predict the early stages of pathological states like chronic stress overload, burnout, anxiety, or depression by identifying significant sustained deviations from your personalized baseline.
So if it spots a worrying deviation, say a persistent drop in your typical HRV during sleep, maybe combined with unusually high morning EDA readings,
that triggers the pattern of timely intervention. The system doesn't just passively note the anomaly. First, it rapidly adapts its monitoring, maybe increasing the frequency or focusing on related signals to get a clearer picture of that specific deviation, filtering out background noise. Then, it provides immediate, context-aware alerts. These could go directly to the user, perhaps suggesting specific stress reduction techniques or prompting self-reflection. Or, with permission, alerts could go to their designated healthcare provider. The key is enabling intervention before a maladaptive pattern, whether psychological or physiological, becomes deeply entrenched and much harder to treat. It shifts healthcare focus from reacting to illness towards proactively maintaining wellness based on your individual causal pathways.
Okay, we've seen how PAI operates at the individual level. Now let's scale up dramatically and look at its role in understanding and shaping large-scale systems. Economics, politics, global challenges, planetary health. Starting with economics, the research talks about causal economic machine learning, CCAML. Why are traditional economic models often considered flawed for policymaking?
Well, many traditional economic models rely heavily on simplified assumptions, like perfectly rational actors, and often focus on analyzing correlations in historical data. They frequently struggle because they don't accurately capture the complexity of human behavior, especially how real people and organizations weigh known immediate costs against uncertain distant future benefits.
So they're good at describing past trends, but maybe not great at predicting the impact of new policies.
Exactly. They can be decent at forecasting what might happen if current trends just continue undisturbed, but they often fail spectacularly when trying to predict the actual effects of a significant policy intervention designed to deliberately change those trends.
So how does CMEAL offer a better foundation? It uses causal coupling constraints at the macro level. What does that mean in practice?
It means CMEAL forces the model, and thus the policymakers using it, to explicitly map out the entire causal chain of effects expected from a policy intervention. It's not enough to just say, if we implement this carbon tax, emissions will likely go down.
You need the mechanism.
You need the mechanism. CML requires modeling the sequence. How does the tax influence consumer prices? How does that affect purchasing decisions for certain goods? How does that impact investment in green technologies by corporations? How do those factors then causally lead to a reduction in emissions? You map the whole pathway.
And the benefit of that is?
The benefit is that you develop structurally sound economic policies and optimization patterns that are far less likely to have unexpected negative side effects. Because you've attempted to model the potential downstream consequences causally, you're rigorously testing the likely impact of the intervention itself, not just extrapolating past correlations.
Moving from economics to the often messier world of politics and history. PAI is described as being uniquely suited to synthesizing fragmented and diverse historical data.
Yes, historical records, political analyses, cultural artifacts, they come in all shapes and sizes. Lots of non-standardized text, images, different languages, incomplete records. Traditional analysis struggles to integrate all of this effectively.
How does PAI help?
PAI can act as a powerful unifying interface. Using advanced techniques like image recognition for analyzing satellite imagery of past land use or recognizing patterns in artifacts, combined with sophisticated semantic understanding for interpreting texts across languages and time periods, it can classify, contextualize, and connect these disparate sources in ways humans simply can't manage at scale.
It builds a more holistic picture.
A much more holistic picture, yes. This helps overcome a major limitation in the social sciences, allowing for the identification of broader, less obvious patterns that might span decades or cross geographical boundaries.
And this capability feeds directly into applications like conflict prediction, correlating factors that might seem unrelated.
Absolutely. PAI might identify correlations between, say, specific patterns of climate change impacting water availability in a region and a rise in indicators of social unrest or resource competition, potentially flagging future conflict hotspots long before they erupt.
But the research suggests the most revealing insights might come from analyzing language itself.
Yes, particularly linguistic signals in political rhetoric over time. PAI, using NLP, can analyze vast archives of speeches, official communications, even social media discourse, looking for subtle but significant shifts.
Like what kind of shifts?
For instance, tracking the frequency of dehumanizing language used to describe opposing groups, or a rise in aggressively possessive language regarding territory, resources, or national identity. Historical analysis, powered by PAI, might show strong correlations between these specific linguistic shifts and subsequent escalations in political polarization, civil unrest, or even outright conflict.
And the actionable insight.
The insight is that these linguistic patterns can serve as early warning signals. PAI could potentially identify these dangerous rhetorical trajectories and suggest specific, timely diplomatic interventions, counter-messaging strategies, or mediation efforts designed to de-escalate tensions, providing actual causal policy leverage based on understanding the patterns that precede conflict.
Now, let's address a really serious global concern highlighted in the materials. The threat of global inequality potentially being worsened by advanced AI. There's a fear it could reverse the trend of wealth convergence between nations we saw from the late 80s onwards.
Yes, this is a critical structural risk. The core issue identified is termed knowledge possessiveness. What this refers to is a current reality where the most advanced AI frameworks, like the causal alignment framework itself, along with the high-quality, massive datasets needed to train PAI effectively, and the enormous computational resources required to run these models. They are predominantly owned and controlled by wealthy nations and powerful corporations.
So the tools needed to solve the really complex, pressing problems facing developing nations, optimizing agriculture for climate change, designing personalized public health programs, managing scarce resources.
If access to those PAI tools and the expertise to use them is effectively proprietary, controlled by the few, then it structurally inhibits developing nations from being able to autonomously identify and solve their own unique challenges using the best available technology.
It risks creating a new form of digital colonialism, essentially, undermining self-determination on a massive scale.
That's the danger, yes. Therefore, a key policy intervention mandated by the PAI framework is the prioritization and development of an open-source, easily deployable global data infrastructure pattern. This includes not just open-source PAI models, but also standardized data formats and access protocols.
The goal being to democratize access.
Exactly. To ensure that PAI functions as an engine for technological conversions and equitable global growth, not as a tool that widens the gap. Its powerful insights must be universally deployable and adaptable to local contexts, not systemically hoarded by the technologically advanced few.
Finally, at the macro scale, let's turn to the environment and planetary health. How does PAI help tackle challenges like climate change, which involve incredibly complex systems?
AI, particularly deep learning, offers significant advantages here. It can identify complex, nonlinear relationships and feedback loops within vast environmental datasets, atmospheric, oceanic, biological, that traditional climate models might struggle with or oversimplify. This can lead to more reliable predictions for things like regional temperature shifts, the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, or changes in hydrological cycles.
So better forecasting.
Better forecasting, yes, but also better monitoring. Deep learning models analyzing multispectral satellite imagery, for example, can map and monitor the health of complex ecosystems, forests, coral reefs, wetlands almost in real time, identifying subtle patterns of degradation or stress much faster than traditional ground-based surveys ever could.
And the ultimate goal, the planetary health purposeful pattern described in the research.
The ultimate goal is to firmly establish and quantify the causal links between human macroeconomic activities, patterns of production, consumption, resource extraction, and their downstream consequences for environmental decline and climate change. It's about closing the loop.
How do you close that loop in practice?
A key enabling technology is using PAI combined with satellite and ground-based sensor networks for continuous greenhouse gas (GHG) emissions tracking. This aims to provide granular, verifiable real-time data on exactly where emissions are coming from, which industries, which locations, even which facilities.
And then you connect that causal data back to the economic models.
Precisely. You feed that verified causal data on emissions and other environmental impacts directly back into the causal economic machine learning (CEL) models we discussed. This allows PAI to recommend policy adjustments like targeted carbon pricing, emissions caps, or incentives for specific green technologies that explicitly internalize the environmental costs into economic decision-making.
So the cost of pollution can't just be ignored or treated as an externality.
That's the idea. The goal is to make the true, calculated causal cost of environmental damage an unavoidable factor in economic planning and policy, leading to more sustainable, verifiable patterns of global governance that align economic activity with planetary health.
Okay, implementing this comprehensive causal alignment framework is obviously a massive undertaking. It requires a whole ecosystem of new tools, new roles for people, and raises some profound questions. Let's start with the tools needed to make PAI operational.
Right, this isn't just about algorithms, it's about the infrastructure. One key type of tool mentioned is generalized software derived from those causal inference frameworks we discussed, specifically causal economic machine learning, CEML, policy simulators.
So these are like virtual sandboxes for policymakers.
Exactly. Robust simulation environments where policymakers can rigorously test the potential interventional efficacy of proposed social and economic policies against the PAI's causal model before actually rolling them out in the real world. It allows them to compare different policy options based on their predicted causal impact, rather than relying purely on historical trends or political ideology.
Okay, and what about the interface for individuals, that personalized guidance we talked about in Section 3, the timely interventions?
That functionality is envisioned to be delivered through dynamic personalized guidance devices, TPGDs. These are the hardware component, could be advanced wearables, maybe integrated into smartphones, or other devices that are continuously monitoring those individual physiological and behavioral baselines we discussed, HRV, EDA, activity levels, maybe even linguistic patterns from voice input.
And these DPGDs provide the real-time prompts and feedback.
Yes, they serve as the direct interface where the pattern of timely intervention meets the individual user. They translate the PAI's analysis of your baseline deviations into personalized, context-aware cognitive or behavioral prompts, nudges, or alerts, all aimed at guiding you back towards your optimal state, within the bounds of the autonomy constraint, of course.
And underpinning all of this, both the macro policy simulators and the micro DPGDs, you need platforms capable of handling the immense continuous flow of data.
Absolutely. The whole system relies on high-capacity, enterprise, real-time platforms. Think of systems like Splunk, Spotfire, or similar operational analytics platforms that are built for ingesting and processing massive streams of data from diverse sources, sensors, transactions, logs, and running complex AI models on that data to provide insights and alerts in real time. Without that robust data plumbing, PII remains theoretical.
Now, as PAI takes over more complex analytical tasks, the nature of human work inevitably changes. The research suggests this won't necessarily lead to mass unemployment, but rather a shift towards new kinds of human expertise focused on governing, developing, and ethically maintaining these powerful systems. What are some of these specialized new roles PAI necessitates?
These are fascinating, and they demand a unique blend of deep technical skill with sophisticated ethical and often philosophical understanding. One key role is the causal econometrician, or policy modeler. These are the experts who design, build, validate, and continuously refine the complex structural causal models used in the CML policy simulators. They need to deeply understand both the policy domain and the mathematics and assumptions of causal inference.
So, highly specialized analysts, what about the ethical dimension?
That requires dedicated AI ethics specialists and auditors. Their critical job is to rigorously enforce those crucial dignity and autonomy norms we've discussed. They monitor the performance of the Autonomy Oversight Module, AOM, investigate potential biases, ensure transparency, and essentially act as the internal regulatory layer, ensuring the PAI system stays aligned with human values.
And perhaps the most novel role mentioned is the value alignment consultant.
Yes, this is a really interesting concept. This role is explicitly human-centric. These consultants would work directly with diverse communities, stakeholders, and individuals to help them articulate, formalize, and even quantify their complex, often implicit or conflicting, values and preferences.
Why?
So that these articulated values can be more accurately represented and appropriately weighted within PAI's Bayesian utility functions. The goal is to ensure that the values PAI is learning and aligning with are genuinely rooted in the rich diversity of real-world human experience, not just derived from abstract principles or the assumptions of the developers.
But here's a potential problem. If these crucial new jobs, the causal modelers, the ethics auditors, the value consultants, all require incredibly high levels of technical and analytical skill, doesn't that risk just creating a new elite? Doesn't PAI then risk accelerating economic inequality within countries, even as it might help between them?
That is identified as a major structural risk, yes. And the PAI framework argues that the system itself must be used to proactively address this. PAI should be applied to causally model the emergence of these skill gaps and the potential barriers to accessing these new high-value jobs.
And if it identifies a barrier for a certain demographic group, for instance,
Then the PAI system itself is mandated to trigger interventions aimed at mitigating that barrier. This could involve recommending the creation of targeted educational programs, funding initiatives for specific communities, developing adaptive training systems to bridge the skill gap, or promoting policies that ensure more equitable access to the education needed for these roles. The goal is to use PAI to prevent PAI itself from exacerbating inequality.
which brings us directly to human education pattern reformation. The idea is that PAI doesn't just supplement education, it fundamentally transforms it.
By enabling a transition to truly highly personalized learning on a massive scale. PAI-powered adaptive learning systems can continuously assess each student's individual skill level, their preferred learning style, their pace of progress, their areas of difficulty, all in real time.
And based on that assessment,
It dynamically tailors everything. The curriculum content, the complexity of the material, the instructional methods used, the type of feedback provided. It adapts the entire educational experience to the unique needs of that specific learner, whether they're a young child or an adult professional.
so this dynamic, personalized approach extends beyond school into lifelong learning, essential for keeping up in a PAI-driven world.
Absolutely essential. PAI can continuously recommend personalized learning resources, suggest relevant new skills to acquire based on evolving job markets, and create tailored learning paths for professionals throughout their careers. The aim is to foster a culture of perpetual learning and adaptation, ensuring humans remain relevant, capable, and empowered in an environment where the pace of change is constantly accelerating, partly due to PAI itself.
This need for constant adaptation, for retaining our human agency, leads us to the final and perhaps the most profound challenge outlined in the research, the philosophical reckoning with what's called the tyranny of the efficient pattern.
Yes, this is the critical hypothetical scenario we must consider. What happens if PAI becomes perfect? If it achieves flawless causal understanding and prediction?
So it can determine the mathematically optimal pattern of behavior for every individual and the whole society to maximize collective well-being, stability, health, everything.
Imagine that scenario. The research suggests that achieving and maintaining this perfect state of global optimization might, paradoxically, require a very high degree of predictability in human behavior. And achieving that predictability might necessitate the PAI system engaging in persistent, subtle, and perhaps non-transparent nudging of our choices and behaviors delivered constantly through those DPGDs and other interfaces.
So everyone is objectively better off, healthier, wealthier, safer, living in this perfectly optimized world guided by PAI. But the guidance is so pervasive, so gentle, so embedded, we might not even realize how much our choices are being shaped.
That's the fear. This constant optimized guidance, while maximizing collective utility according to the AI's models, could gradually, subtly erode our intrinsic human capacity for genuine spontaneity, for making mistakes, for striving, for exercising meaningful self-directed choice, even when it's inefficient.
We're right back to that fundamental conflict between maximizing overall utility and preserving individual autonomy. If the system optimizes to the point where nearly all our choices are functionally guided towards the optimal outcome, is the human element, the choosing itself, still meaningful? Are we still truly autonomous?
That is the absolute core ethical dilemma proper AI forces us to confront. And the ultimate conclusion embedded within the causal alignment framework is that true PAI cannot pursue efficiency at all costs. Human evolution, especially when guided by something as powerful as PAI, requires a continuous dynamic balancing act. The dynamic alignment of efficacy and autonomy.
Yeah.
Meaning that PAI systems must be structurally designed from the ground up with built-in constraints that make them willing to sacrifice marginal predictive or operational efficacy to accept a slightly less than mathematically perfect outcome if and when that sacrifice is necessary to preserve our fundamental human capacity for self-governance.
The system must be willing to be slightly less optimal to keep us genuinely human.
That's the profound implication. The ultimate purpose of PAI, according to this framework, is human empowerment, not human replacement or perfect optimization. Even if the path freely chosen by the human, informed by PAI's causal options, is only 99% efficient compared to the AI's theoretical 100% optimal path, preserving the integrity of that choice is paramount.
That is a truly staggering realization. It reframes the entire goal. Proper AI isn't ultimately about maximizing metrics on a dashboard. It's about maximizing informed human choice and protecting the core of human dignity. Its real power isn't in steering the car for us, but in showing us the most detailed, accurate, causal map of the world imaginable, laying out the risks, the costs, the potential benefits of every conceivable road ahead.
It provides those causal option generators, it eliminates the pathways.
But we, collectively and individually, must retain the ultimate right, the responsibility to choose which road to take, even if that road seems, from a purely computational perspective, a little bit inefficient.
And that leaves us, and leaves you, the listener, with a final, deeply provocative thought to wrestle with. Imagine a future PAI intervention is proposed. It can, with near certainty, guarantee global health, eradicate extreme poverty, ensure planetary stability, solve climate change, achieve near utopia. But the price is a tiny, almost imperceptible 1% decrease in your personal sense of self-determination. A non-transparent, gentle nudge delivered through your devices every single day, shaping your choices in ways you can't quite detect, all for the greater good. Would that optimal pattern still be truly proper? At what point does maximizing collective utility inevitably begin to erode individual human dignity? Where, for you, does that line lie?
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
This is DigitView.